The cold was not a blanket, it was a blade. Clara gasped, the air burning her lungs, each breath a shard of glass. She had stopped feeling her feet 2, maybe 3 hours ago. That was the danger. That was the death sleep the old-timers warned about. But she could not stop. She would not, tied to her back with a worn woolen shawl. Her daughter, Nora, breathed in shallow, whistling puffs. The child was 5 years old and a terrible, precious weight. Nora had been silent for a full day. A mercy that Clara prayed was sleep and not something worse. Clara stumbled, her left leg punching through the snow's crust, sinking her to the hip. Panic, hot and acidic, flooded her throat. She clawed at the frozen bank, her raw fingers screaming as they scraped against the ice. No, not here. She was starving. The hunger was a hollow ache that had moved past pain and into a dull, thrumming weakness. But the fear was worse. The fear was a living thing, riding on her shoulder, whispering. They had been running for 6 days. 6 days since she had stolen the horse. 6 days after she had grabbed Nora and fled the ranch. Fled him. The horse had lasted 4 days, collapsing in a snowdrift, its breath pluming in one final, ragged sigh. Clara had taken the saddle blanket, wept for 2 minutes, and then kept walking. She walked toward the high pines, hoping the dense trees would hide her tracks from the men she knew were following. The wind howled through the granite peaks, a lonely, damning sound. The world was endless white and iron gray. She did not know where she was, somewhere in the territories, high in the mountains. The pass she had been aiming for was surely choked with snow. She was a fool to have tried it in winter, a desperate fool. Nora stirred on her back, a small, whimpering sound. "Mama," the child mumbled, her voice thick with sleep. "Cold. I know, baby, I know," Clara whispered, her own voice cracking. She shifted the girl's weight, trying to nestle her deeper into the blanket. "We'll find a fire. We'll be warm soon. I promise. Nora Bug, I promise." It was a lie. She had nothing. They were walking to their graves. She forced herself up, pushing against the snow-laden branch of a spruce. Her eyes scanned the ridges, searching for anything. A cave, a hollow, a prayer. And then she saw it. It was not hope, not at first. It was just an anomaly. A thin, gray thread rising against the darkening sky. It was smoke. Clara froze, her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird in a cage. Smoke meant fire. It meant warmth. It meant life. It also meant men. She stood there, paralyzed by the choice. It could be them, Jasper's men. They were smart. They were relentless. They could have circled the pass, anticipating her. If she walked toward that smoke, she could be walking right back into the hell she had just escaped. But if she stayed here, she and Nora would be frozen statues by morning. Nora coughed, a dry, racking sound that shook her small body. That settled it. Clara turned her body toward the smoke. It looked to be a mile, maybe more, across the ravine and up the next slope. She would rather face a man's bullet than the slow, agonizing certainty of the cold. She began to move, driven by a new, frantic energy. She half ran, half fell down the embankment, sliding on the ice, using her hands to balance. The snow was thinner here, under the canopy of the massive pines. As she reached the frozen creek at the bottom of the ravine, the air changed. It was not a sound. Not at first. It was a smell, a rank, musky scent that cut through the sharp odor of the pine. It was the smell of damp fur and blood. Clara stopped. She listened. The only sound was the wind and the frantic pulse in her own ears. Then she saw the tracks. Big, canine. They were fresh, the edges still sharp. And there were many. She looked up, scanning the trees on the far bank. A shadow moved. Then another. They were not shadows. A wolf stepped out from behind a curtain of willow. It was huge, its fur a matted gray and brown, its yellow eyes fixed on her. It did not growl. I just watched it. Clara's blood turned to ice. She had seen wolves before, but always from a distance, always from the safety of a wagon. This one was 20 yards away. Another appeared to its left, and a third, emerging from the creek bed, cutting off the direction she had come. They were a pack, and she was in their larder. "No," she breathed. She fumbled at her waist, her numb fingers searching for the skinning knife she'd had. It was gone. Lost in the fall. Lost with the horse. She had nothing. She slowly, carefully, began to unwrap the shawl from her own shoulders. Her only thought to shield Nora, to put her own body between the child and the teeth. Nora, sensing the sudden tension, woke up. The girl unwound her arms from Clara's neck and sat up on her back, blinking. "Mama, who are—" Nora started to say. "The first wolf, the big one," took a step forward. It lowered its head, a low, guttural rumble starting deep in its chest. "Nora, you be quiet. You hold on to Mama. You hold on tight," Clara said, her voice a strained whisper. She started to back away, step by agonizing step. The wolf on the left mirrored her, trotting soundlessly, its paws making no noise on the crust. They were flanking her. They were hunting. "Get back!" Clara screamed. Her voice was thin and raw. "Get back!" It only excited them. The third wolf, the one from the creek bed, lunged. It was a test, a feint. Clara kicked snow at it, and it snapped at the air, its teeth clicking. This was it. This was the end. After everything she had endured, after all the miles, she would die here, in the dark, torn apart in the snow. Nora started to cry, a high, terrified wail that echoed in the frozen valley. The big wolf's growl deepened. It gathered its haunches, tensing to spring. Clara turned, pulling Nora from her back and shoving the child behind her. She grabbed a fallen branch, heavy with ice, and raised it. She was a pathetic defense. It was then, in that moment of absolute, final terror, that she screamed. It was not a plea for help. There was no one to help. It was a raw, primal burst of rage and grief, a denial of her fate. "They're coming!" she shrieked, the words ripped from her soul. She was screaming at the wolves. She was screaming about the men. She was screaming at God himself. The wolf sprang. A sound split the world. It was not a sound Clara had ever heard before. It was a deafening crack that seemed to come from the sky itself, echoing off the granite cliffs. A thunderclap in the dead of winter. The wolf, in midair, yelped. It twisted, its body contorting, and hit the snow 3 feet to her left, landing in a spray of white. It lay still for a second, then kicked, a dark stain spreading rapidly from its flank. Clara stared, dumbfounded. Crack! Another shot. The wolf to her right spun around, bit at its own hip, and fell, its legs scrabbling. The third wolf, the one from the creek bed, froze. It looked at its fallen packmates, then up at the ridge. It tucked its tail and bolted, disappearing into the timber in a single, fluid bound. Silence, absolute and heavy, fell over the ravine. The only sound was the high-pitched ringing in Clara's ears and the whimpering of the dying wolf. "Don't move!" A voice boomed from the ridge above her. It was a man's voice, rough as gravel. Clara could not have moved if she tried. She was frozen. The useless branch still held high. A figure emerged from the trees, tall and broad, silhouetted against the dying light. He held a rifle, long and heavy, resting in the crook of his arm. He moved with an easy, powerful stride, sliding down the embankment, his heavy boots sinking deep. He stopped 10 feet away. He was a big man, buried in layers of buckskin and fur. A thick, dark beard covered the lower half of his face, frosted with ice. His eyes, under the brim of a worn hat, were the color of the sky before a storm. He did not look at her. He looked at the wolves. He walked to the first wolf, the one that had lunged at her, and nudged it with his boot. It was dead. He moved to the second, which was still twitching. He calmly raised his rifle, lowered the muzzle, and fired again. The sound was duller this time, final. He reloaded, his movements economical and precise, his gaze sweeping the tree line. He was a hunter, a trapper. He seemed carved from the mountain itself. Only then did he turn his attention to her. His eyes were cold, not cruel, just empty, annoyed, as if she were a rock that had fallen onto his trail. He took in her torn dress, her frozen, matted hair, and the small, trembling child half hidden behind her skirts. "You," he said. His voice was not welcoming. "What in God's name are you doing in my valley?" Clara's jaw worked, but no sound came out. The adrenaline was fading, and the cold was rushing back in. A tidal wave of exhaustion. Her legs began to tremble. Nora peeked out. "Mama?" The man's eyes dropped to the child. His expression tightened. It was not a softening. It was a hardening, a closing of some internal door. "Please," Clara finally managed, the word a ragged croak. My child. She's cold." The man spat into the snow. "You're both near dead. You're frostbit." He looked at her feet, bare and blue, stuffed into the ruined remnants of what had once been leather shoes. "Bad," he sighed. A plume of white vapor. It was the sigh of a man burdened, a man who had wanted only to be left alone and had just seen his solitude shattered. He slung the rifle over his shoulder. "Can you walk?" Clara tried to take a step, her legs folded. The world tilted. The man cursed, a single, sharp word. He closed the distance in 2 strides. He did not offer a hand. He hooked an arm under her shoulders, hauled her to her feet, and set her upright. His grip was rough, impersonal, like a man riding a fallen fence post. "You walk, or you die here. I'm not carrying you." He turned and started up the slope toward the smoke, not looking back. Clara knew it was the last offer of help she would get. She grabbed Nora's hand. "Come, baby. We have to go." The man's cabin was not a home. It was a box built to defy the wilderness, tucked between 2 massive pine ridges. It was made of thick, rough-hewn logs, chinked with mud and moss. The smoke she had seen rose from a chimney made of river stone. He kicked the door open and stood aside. "Get in! By the fire!" Clara stumbled inside, Nora clinging to her. The change from the biting wind to the close, stifling heat of the one-room cabin was dizzying. A fire roared in the stone hearth. The room was small, dominated by a rough-hewn table, a single chair, and a bed frame in the corner piled high with furs. The walls were lined with traps, skinning knives, and snowshoes. It smelled of wood smoke, cured leather, and drying meat. The man, Silas, as she would come to know him, though he did not offer his name, ignored them. He went to a cast-iron pot hanging over the fire, lifted the lid, and stirred. The smell of stew, rich with venison and root vegetables, filled the air. It was the most beautiful smell Clara had ever known. "Your feet," he said, not looking at her. He pointed to the hearth. "Sit, put them up." Clara sank onto the rough floor, her back against the stones. The warmth was agony, 1,000 needles stabbing into her frozen skin. Silas brought a bucket of snow in from outside. He knelt, grabbed her ankle, and began to rub her blackened, swollen feet with the snow. His touch was hard, methodical. Clara cried out, a thin, sharp sound. It was the worst pain yet. "It's the thaw," he said, his voice flat. "It's going to hurt. Better than losing them." He worked in silence for 10 minutes, his breathing steady, his expression grim. He looked at her feet with the detached interest of a butcher inspecting a cut of meat. "You're lucky," he finally said, dropping her foot. "The black's only on the toes. You'll keep the feet, maybe not the nails." He stood, grabbed a wooden bowl, and ladled a heavy scoop of stew into it. He handed it to her, along with a horn spoon. "Eat." Clara's hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the spoon. She took a mouthful. It was hot. It burned her tongue, burned her throat. But it was the most profound relief she had ever felt. She ate, hunched over, like a starved animal. She shoved a spoonful toward Nora, who was huddled under her arm, the child's eyes wide and terrified. Nora shook her head. I want my papa." Clara froze, the spoon halfway to her mouth. Silas, who had been adding wood to the fire, went still. He looked at the girl. "There's no papa here, child, just me." "He's not my papa," Nora said, her lip trembling. She looked at Clara. "I want my real papa." Clara's face flushed with a shame so hot it burned away the cold. "Nora, hush, be quiet." She tried to force a smile. This man saved us. He's a good man." Silas snorted. He turned back to the fire. "I ain't a good man. I'm just a man who doesn't like wolves in his yard." He gestured to the pile of furs on the cot. "You sleep there. The girl, too. I'll take the floor." "Thank you," Clara whispered. He just grunted. He took his rifle, a cleaning cloth, and a small jug of oil, and sat in the single chair at the table, his back to them. The message was clear. The hospitality was over. Clara helped Nora out of her wet clothes and tucked the girl under the heavy buffalo robes. The child was asleep in seconds, exhausted by the terror. Clara lay beside her, her body screaming with pain and relief. She was alive. She was warm. She was, for this one night, safe. She watched the man at the table. The firelight played over his broad back, the muscles shifting under his wool shirt as he worked. He was a mountain of a man, silent and forbidding. He had saved her life, and he seemed to hate her for it. She didn't care. She closed her eyes, the sound of the crackling fire and the rhythmic shh of the oilcloth on steel lulling her into the first true sleep she'd had in a week. The cabin was dark when Silas finally banked the fire, leaving only a bed of glowing orange coals. The woman and her child were asleep, huddled together on his cot. The child, Nora, was tucked under the woman's arm, her breathing shallow but steady. The woman, Clara, was anything but steady. He watched her in the dying light, even in exhaustion. She was tense, her brow was furrowed, her hands clenched into fists by her face. She turned, moaning softly, a long, shuddering sigh escaping her. He had seen that kind of sleep before. It was the sleep of the hunted. He'd seen her fear. That was plain enough. In the ravine, she looked like a rabbit cornered by coyotes. But he had also seen, just for a second, the way she had put her body between the child and the wolf, the way she had raised that broken branch. That wasn't fear. That was strength. A bitter, useless kind of strength. Maybe, but it was there, buried deep. He moved to the door and checked the heavy wooden bar he had set in place. He did not like this. He had come to this valley precisely to be away from this. Away from people. Away from women. Away from children. He spread his own bedroll on the cold floor planks near the hearth, as far from the cot as he could get. He lay down, his rifle beside him, but sleep did not come. The cabin was too full. It was filled with the soft breathing of the child, the smell of wet wool, and the faint, feminine scent of the woman. It was an intrusion. He closed his eyes, forcing his mind blank, pushing away the images of the day. He retreated to the place inside himself he had built, the cold, quiet place where nothing could touch him. But the child's voice echoed in the dark. "I want my real papa." He had not heard a child's voice in 5 years, not since he drifted. He was not in the cabin. He was in the sun. The air was warm, smelling of prairie grass and dust. He was walking, and a small hand was tucked into his. It was warm, sticky with jam. A voice called his name, a woman's voice. He turned, and she was there, on the porch of the soddy, her hair the color of wheat, her smile wide. She was holding a pie, laughter. The sound of it. The child, his child, was laughing, running toward the porch, chasing a chicken. "Papa, look! Papa!" Silas felt his own mouth move, felt the unfamiliar stretch of a smile. He reached for the child, his heart so full it ached, so full it. He woke up with a gasp. He was on the floor. The cabin was ice cold and pitch dark. The fire was dead. He was alone. He sat up, his heart hammering, his body drenched in a cold sweat. His hand was outstretched, reaching for nothing. The dream. It was always the same dream. He breathed hard, dragging the frigid air into his lungs. He could hear the woman breathing on the cot. A stranger. He got up. He did not bother with the fire. He grabbed his heavy fur cloak, pulled the door bar, and stepped out into the pre-dawn blackness. The wind cut him to the bone. He welcomed it. He stood in the snow, letting the cold seep in, letting it freeze the memory of the dream, letting it scour away the phantom warmth of a small hand. He was Silas. He was alone, and that was the only way he would ever be. The first 3 days were a blur of pain, hot broth, and the suffocating weight of sleep. Clara's world shrank to the small, one-room cabin, a 10 by 10-foot square of rough-hewn logs that smelled of pine, smoked meat, and the man who moved through it like a shadow. He was Silas. He had not offered the name. Nora had asked him, in the high, clear, and unafraid voice only a 5-year-old possessed. "What's your name, mister?" she had asked on the second morning. While he sat at his table oiling a trap, he had not looked up. "Silas, my name is Nora. My mama is Clara. We're from far away," Silas had just grunted. The metal click-clack of the trap spring the only answer. But the girl, it seemed, was not so easily discouraged. She was a small, bright spark in the dim, smoky room. The terror of the wolves had faded, replaced by a child's relentless curiosity. While Clara remained huddled by the fire, her body healing, her mind still running, Nora began to explore. She watched him. She watched him split wood, his muscles bunching under his wool shirt. She watched him sharpen his knives, his big hands surprisingly precise. She watched him cook, a simple, methodical process of adding jerky and dried roots to the pot. Clara, however, remained tense. She was a guest in a cage. Silas had saved their lives, but he was a jailer as much as a savior. He was cold, distant, and made no effort at conversation. He had given them his bed, but the gesture felt less like kindness and more like an inconvenience he wanted to solve. He slept on the floor near the door, a breathing barricade, every morning. The world outside was whiter. The snow fell without pause, a thick, silent curtain that sealed them in. "The pass?" Clara asked on the 4th day, her voice still rough. She stood by the single, small window, a pane of greased parchment that let in a dull, gray light. "The pass to the east." Silas was cleaning his rifle. He did not stop. "Closed. Been closed for a week. Will be closed until April." April. The word hit Clara like a stone. It was only... She tried to count. November, December. She had lost track. "April," she repeated, her voice hollow. "You ain't going nowhere," he said, not unkindly, but as one states a simple fact, like the sun rising or the cold biting. "You're stuck. You were half dead when I found you. You're still too weak to walk to the creek and back." He was right. Her feet were a mess of blisters and raw, weeping skin. Her hands, though thawed, were clumsy. She was a burden, and they both knew it. The silence of the cabin was heavy, broken only by the crackle of the fire, Nora's humming, and the howl of the wind. In that silence, Clara's past began to leak out, in fragments, like blood from a wound she could not staunch. It started a few nights later. Nora was asleep, her small face peaceful in the firelight. Silas was mending a snowshoe, his head bent over the work. "He was a rancher," Clara said, her voice quiet. Silas did not look up. His hands, weaving the rawhide, did not pause. His name was Jasper Kane. The name hung in the air. It meant nothing to him. He owned everything. The town, the marshal, the bank. My father had a small holding. Kane wanted the water rights." She stopped, her fingers twisting the edge of the blanket. "He got them." Silas tied off a knot, his teeth pulling it tight. "He found me. After I was working in the saloon, just serving. He brought me to the ranch, said I'd be safe, said he'd protect me." Her laugh was a short, ugly sound. "He was a liar." She did not say more. She did not speak of the bruises she had hidden with long sleeves, or the way he liked to protect her with a locked door and a heavy hand. She did not speak of the brand. Not yet. She just let the small, ugly pieces of her story fall onto the floor, And Silas, in his silence, simply let them lie. He, in turn, offered nothing of himself. His life was in his routine. He would wake in the blackness before dawn, the scrape of his boot on the floor, the clink of the water pail, the sharp huff of his breath as he stepped outside. One morning, he prepared to leave. He bundled himself in thick furs, strapped on his snowshoes, and checked his rifle. "Where are you going?" Clara asked, sitting up in the cot, her heart suddenly tight. "Trading post, 2 days' ride. If the snow holds, I need salt, need medicine for your feet. 2 days." The panic in her voice was unmistakable. "Alone, in this wilderness?" He looked at her, his eyes flat. "I run my trap lines. I trade my furs. This is what I do. It's how I live." He pointed to the heavy wooden bar for the door. "Put this on after I leave. Do not open that door. Not for anything. Not for a voice you think you know. Not for a man begging for help. Nothing. You build up the fire, you eat the stew, and you wait." He left. For 2 days and 2 nights, Clara and Nora were utterly alone. The silence of the cabin was replaced by the silence of the world, a vast, white, and terrifying emptiness. Every creak of the roof, every skitter of a branch, was an outlaw, a wolf, one of Cain's men. Clara sat with Silas's spare axe in her lap, her eyes fixed on the door, until she collapsed into a fitful, haunted sleep. When he returned, he was a creature of the snow, his beard thick with ice. He carried a heavy burlap sack, which he dropped on the table, flour, salt, a small tin of coffee. He had a dead deer slung over his shoulder, its fur stiff with frost. He was all business, hanging the deer outside, stoking the fire, ignoring them. Then Nora saw it. On the table, half hidden by the flour sack, was a small, crudely made doll. It was just a scrap of blue gingham, stuffed with wool, with charcoal marks for eyes. Nora crept toward it. She looked at Silas. He was aggressively busy, his back to her, cleaning snow from his rifle. Nora picked it up. She held it to her chest, her face lit with a joy so pure it was painful. Clara looked at Silas's back. Her throat tightened. "Thank you," she whispered. He just grunted, as if she had commented on the weather. Life settled into a strange, strained domesticity. The three of them, a broken triangle, trapped by the snow. Clara's strength returned. Her feet healed. She began to help, sweeping the floor with a broom of bound twigs, stirring the endless stew, mending his torn buckskins with a small sewing kit he'd provided. She was trying to earn her keep. She was trying to be useful. She was terrified of being useless. One afternoon, while Silas was outside splitting a new log, Clara decided to cut vegetables for the pot. He had traded for a few precious onions and potatoes. She was at the table, using his large, heavy skinning knife. Her hands were still clumsy, the skin tender. The knife was too sharp, her grip too weak. It slipped. The blade bit deep into the heel of her left palm. She gasped. A sharp intake of breath. Blood, shockingly red, welled up and spilled over the table. She clutched her hand to her chest, trying to hide it, trying to stifle the problem she had created. But Nora saw. The girl, who had been playing with her doll by the fire, let out a piercing scream. The cabin door burst open. Silas filled the frame, axe in one hand, his eyes wild. "What is it?" He saw Clara, her face pale, the blood dripping through her fingers onto the floor. He cursed, a low, violent sound. He dropped the axe, strode to her, and grabbed her wrist. "You fool! Let me see!" He shoved her into the chair, his grip like iron. "Nora, go to bed. Put your face in the fur. Now!" The girl, terrified, scrambled to the cot and did as she was told. Silas grabbed a tin cup and a jug from the shelf. He poured a clear, stinging liquid into the cup. "Whiskey. Drink." "I don't—" "Drink it." She took a sip. It burned a fiery path down her throat. He took the rest himself, in one swallow, then splashed the dregs of the jug directly onto her hand. Clara screamed. The pain was white-hot, a fire that eclipsed everything. Tears sprang to her eyes, but she did not pull away. She bit her lip until she tasted her own blood. "Hold still," he growled, but his voice was different, less angry, more focused. He grabbed a clean linen rag, one he used for his rifle, and pressed it hard into the wound. He held it there, his other hand cupping her elbow, forcing her arm steady. They stood in silence for a full minute. The only sounds the blizzard outside and Clara's ragged breathing. He was so close. She could feel the heat radiating from his body. She could smell the cold air on his clothes, the scent of pine, and the sharp tang of the whiskey. He knelt, his head bent, his focus entirely on her hand. "It's deep, but clean." He kept the pressure, his thumb resting on the pulse point of her inner wrist. His thumb was calloused and rough, but his touch was surprisingly gentle. He brushed a stray wisp of hair from her face, his movement almost unconscious. Before retrieving a roll of bandaging from a tin box, he began to wrap the hand, his movements deft and sure. He had done this before. He had bound wounds. As he worked, his fingers brushed the soft skin of her inner arm. A jolt, like a spark from the fire, ran up her arm. She looked at him, at the top of his head, his dark, unruly hair. He finished, tying off the bandage. His hand lingered, his thumb stroking the back of her wrist. Just once. She did not know why she did it. It was not a thought. It was an impulse. A deep, aching need for warmth, for comfort, for simple human contact after so long in the cold. She leaned in. Her shoulder brushed his chest, her head tilted, her hair falling against his buckskin shirt. She closed her eyes, just for a second, inhaling his scent. She did not lean as a lover. She leaned as a drowning woman reaching for a log. Silas went rigid. He did not push her. He recoiled. He sprang back as if her touch had been a hot coal. Standing so fast, he knocked the chair backward. Clara's eyes snapped open. He was standing by the fireplace, his back to her, his shoulders heaving. He gripped the stone mantel, his knuckles white. "Don't," he said. His voice was a choked rasp. "Just don't." Clara stared at his back, the rejection a physical blow. The heat in her cheeks turned to a burning, bitter shame. He was disgusted. He thought she was offering herself payment. "Silas," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Get to bed," he growled, not turning. She scrambled to her feet, her hand throbbing, her heart aching with a humiliation that was colder than any frostbite. She fled to the cot, pulling Nora into her arms, and turned her back to the room. She lay there, silent, her body shaking, as she listened to him stand motionless by the fire for what felt like an eternity. That night, the argument came. Nora was asleep, tucked securely under the furs. The blizzard had become a living thing, a screaming demon that rattled the door and shook the small cabin to its bones. Silas sat at the table, cleaning his rifle, again. He had been cleaning it for an hour, his movements sharp, angry. Clara sat by the fire. She could not be still. The small cabin, her sanctuary, now felt like a trap. The silence was an accusation. Finally, she could not stand it. "I am not," she said, her voice low and shaking. "What you think I am." The rhythmic shik-shk of the cleaning rod stopped. I wasn't offering." The word was poison in her mouth. Silas set the rod down, very carefully. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do." She stood up, her good hand clenched into a fist. "Today, when you looked at me like I was dirt." "I told you to go to bed," he said, his voice flat, his back still to her. "No." The word was stronger than she expected. "You will not treat me like this. You think because I came from him, that I am ruined." He was very still. "That's it, isn't it?" she pressed, her voice rising, hysterical. "You think I'm spoiled, tainted. You saved me from the wolves, but you look at me with the same disgust. You think I'm no better than some whore in a saloon." He turned, slowly. His face, in the firelight, was a mask of granite. His eyes were dark, haunted. "You don't know what I think." "Then tell me. Tell me I'm wrong," she cried. "Tell me you don't look at me and see something broken, something used." He did not deny it. He couldn't, because the truth was, he was disgusted. Not with her, with himself. He was disgusted by the flicker of heat he had felt when she leaned against him, the brief, sharp, and treacherous pulse of desire. It felt like a betrayal. It felt like he was spitting on a grave. He looked at her, this broken woman with her bandaged hand and her flashing, tear-filled eyes. And he did not see her. He saw the smoke. He saw the blackened timbers of his own home, the home he had built with his own hands on the plains of Kansas. 5 years ago, he had been gone. A long cattle drive. 3 months of dust and sweat. His pocket heavy with pay. Ready to go home. He'd been riding for a day, pushing his horse, a small porcelain doll for his daughter, Lizzie, wrapped in his saddlebag. He had smelled the smoke from 5 miles out. It was not a wood smoke. It was the smell of a life burning. He found them, or what was left. Sarah, his wife, the woman with hair the color of wheat. Lizzie, his daughter, who had his own dark eyes. The raiding party, Kiowa or maybe Comanche. It didn't matter, had been thorough. He had buried them. He had dug for a day, his hands raw, his mind a cold, empty void. He had found the doll, the one he had bought, half melted in the ashes. He had put it in their grave. He had never forgiven himself. He had been working. He had been earning money. He should have been there. He should have died with them. That was the man Clara was yelling at. A ghost. A man who had died 5 years ago and was just too stubborn to lie down, to feel that warmth for Clara, to feel that life stirring in his chest. It was a betrayal of Sarah. It was a betrayal of Lizzie. "Go to sleep, Clara," he said. His voice scraped raw. "Or what?" she shot back. "You'll throw me out? Let the wolves have me? Is that what you want?" "That's enough," he said. "No, it's not. I will not be ashamed. For being alive, I fought to live. I fought to keep my daughter alive. I am not dirty." She was sobbing now, the words torn from her. He looked at her, and for a second, the fog in his mind cleared. He saw her. Not Sarah, not a whore, just a woman, in pain, standing in his cabin, shaking. And he was afraid. He was terrified. The tension held, taut as a bowstring, for 3 more days. The fight had cleared the air, only to fill it with a new, dangerous electricity. They moved around each other with a careful, wary grace. The blizzard broke. A fragile, brilliant sunlight filled the valley, making the new snow sparkle. Silas was inside, checking his traps by the fire. He was restless, caged. He hated this. He hated feeling this. Clara was mending his shirt. She had become quiet, but her eyes, when she looked at him, were no longer afraid. They were watchful. He needed to split more wood for the night. He stood, pulling on his gloves. He passed her to get to the door. She was holding the shirt up, her bandaged hand next to his. She was concentrating, her tongue caught between her teeth. He stopped. He watched her. The firelight caught the red in her hair, the curve of her neck. He reached out. He did not know why. His hand, clumsy in the glove, grazed her cheek. She froze. Her eyes lifted to his. They were wide, blue, and full of something, not fear. His hand went to her hair, his glove catching a strand. He was so cold. She was so warm. "Silas," she whispered. His name. It was not a plea. It was a question. He saw the woman. He saw her strength. He saw the faint scar on her temple. He saw her lips, parted, her breath a small cloud in the cold air near the door. He saw Sarah. He saw Lizzie. He saw the smoke. He snatched his hand back as if burned. "No." He grabbed his heavy fur cloak from the peg. "Where are you going?" she asked, her voice small, her face pale. "Barn. Horses need checking." It was a lie. The horses were fine. The barn was 30 yards away, and the snow was waist deep. "Silas, wait," she said, standing. He was already at the door. He yanked it open. A cascade of snow fell from the roof. The blast of Arctic air was a relief. "Bar this behind me," he commanded, his voice rough. "Don't open it, for anyone." He stepped out, into the blinding white, into the killing cold. He pulled the door shut with a heavy, final thud. He leaned against the rough log wall of the cabin, the snow stinging his face, his breath coming in ragged, painful gasps. He had fled the fire. He had chosen the ice. He was a coward. He was a fool. And he was, once again, utterly alone. Silas slept in the barn for 2 nights. He returned on the 3rd morning, his face grim and his beard frosted, carrying 2 snared rabbits. He said nothing about his absence, and Clara asked nothing. The cold, it seemed, had driven him back, and a silent truce was struck. He returned to his bedroll on the floor, and the air in the cabin, while still tense, was no longer explosive. A week passed, then another. The rhythm of survival took over, and with it, the hostility began to thaw, like a frozen river groaning under the first melt. Clara's strength returned in full. The color came back to her face. Her bandaged hand healed, leaving a puckered, angry red line on her palm. She was no longer a ghost huddling by the fire. She was a presence. She kneaded dough for flatbread. Her movements sure. She mended, she cleaned, she banked the fire, her body reclaiming its purpose. And Nora, in the way of children, bloomed. The small, terrified creature who had huddled under the furs vanished. In her place was a 5-year-old girl, bright and curious. One afternoon, Silas was skinning one of the rabbits, his movements quick and practiced. Nora, who had been watching from a safe distance, crept closer. "Is his fur soft?" she asked. Silas paused, knife in hand. "Aye, soft as there is. Can I touch it?" Clara started to say no, to pull her back, but Silas grunted, "Wash your hands, then you can—" Nora, her face alight, did as she was told. She stroked the rabbit's pelt, her small fingers sinking into the gray fur. And then, a sound Clara had not heard in months, a sound she thought had been stolen from them forever, bubbled up from the girl's chest. A laugh. It was a small, high-pitched giggle, sharp and bright as a bird's call. Clara's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes stinging. She looked at Silas. He was watching Nora, his expression unreadable, but he did not pull away. He did not scowl. He just watched, his hands still, before returning to his work. The cabin, once a 10-by-10-foot prison, began to feel like a shelter. Silas, too, was changing. The man who had communicated in grunts and single-word commands began to speak. Not much, at first. Just observations about the weather, the traps, the world he knew. "Snow's heavy today," he'd say, staring out the parchment window. "It'll settle deep. Good for the pelts. Makes 'em thick." Or, "That's a blue jay, loudmouth bird. Thinks he owns the valley." He was talking to her. He was, in his own gruff way, letting her in. One afternoon, he came inside, shaking snow from his hat, and saw her struggling to heft the heavy iron log poker. "You're weak," he said. It was not an insult. It was a fact. "You hold an axe like a city woman. You'd be dead in a day." Clara bristled. "I've survived this long." "You haven't survived," he said, taking the poker from her. "You've been lucky. Luck runs out. Your men, the ones you're running from, they find you. What do you do?" Clara had no answer. "Tomorrow," he said, "I will teach you to shoot." The next day, he took her 100 yards from the cabin, into a small clearing surrounded by snow-laden pines. The air was bitingly cold, but the sun was bright, the sky a painful, brilliant blue. He handed her his rifle. The weight of it shocked her, a heavy, solid thing of oiled wood and cold steel. "This is a Winchester, a good one. It's my living—" He showed her the loading gate, the lever, and the hammer. His fingers, bare and red from the cold, brushed hers as he guided her hand. "You don't point it at anything you don't mean to kill. You respect it. It'll save your life." You disrespect it, it'll end it. Or someone else's. He set up a small tin can on a stump, 50 yards away. Now, stand. No, not like that. You're fighting it. He stepped behind her. His body was a wall of heat. He put his hands on her shoulders, turning her, settling her stance. Feet apart. Lean into it. You let the gun become part of you, not something you're holding. His chest was against her back. She could smell the wood smoke on his clothes. She could feel his breath, a warm puff against her ear. She was trembling, and not from the cold. It's going to kick, he said, his voice a low rumble in her ear. It'll bruise you. Don't fight the kick. Let it come. Breathe out. He placed his hand over hers on the stock, his other hand on her waist, steadying her. Sight down the barrel. See the little notch? Put the can right on top of it. Now! Squeeze! Don't pull! Squeeze! She squeezed the trigger. The explosion was deafening. The rifle bucked against her shoulder, a solid, painful punch that sent a shock through her whole body. She cried out, stumbling back. Silas caught her, his arm around her waist, holding her upright. You flinched. You closed your eyes. It's so loud. It's supposed to be. He released her, his face serious. Again? They stayed out there for an hour. She fired again and again. Her shoulder ached. Her ears rang. But with each shot, her fear lessened. She hit the can on the 7th try. A lucky shot, but it sent the can spinning into the snow. A small, fierce pride swelled in her chest. You're slow, Silas said, but there was a new note in his voice. Not approval. Exactly. Respect. But you're steady. You'll do it. He even started to whittle in the evenings. The gingham doll was loved, but it was a scrap. He took a piece of cured pine, and with his skinning knife, he began to carve. He sat by the fire, the blade making soft, whispering sounds, and slowly, a shape emerged. It was a small, simple figure of a horse. Nora sat at his feet, her chin on her hands, watching, utterly mesmerized. He was, Clara realized, building a life in the cabin, not just enduring one. He was letting them, piece by piece, into the frozen fortress of his solitude. The discovery happened on a Tuesday. Clara was sure it was a Tuesday, for no other reason than she had decided to make a full inventory of their supplies. Silas was out checking his high-ridge traps. A 2-day trip. Nora was asleep. Clara was organizing his gear, neatly folding his spare blankets. When she went through his saddlebags, she was looking for spare twine. Nothing more. Her fingers closed around a thick, folded piece of oilskin. Curious. She pulled it out. Inside, tucked away as if to be forgotten, were a few papers, a deed for a claim she couldn't read, a receipt for 2 horses, and a wanted poster. The paper was thick, worn at the creases. The printing was stark, a face crudely drawn, but unmistakable. The high forehead, the dark, heavy mustache, the eyes, even in a sketch, were cold and dead. Below the sketch, the words were large and black. Wanted, dead or alive, Jasper Kane, for murder and cattle rustling. A reward of $500 will be paid by the territorial governor. Clara's breath left her. The world tilted. The small cabin suddenly airless. She sank onto the cot, the poster clutched in her hand. $500. A fortune, enough to buy a man a new life. Silas, the man who had saved her, the man who taught her to shoot, who carved a toy for her daughter. He was a hunter. He had said so. He had not saved her. He had been hunting. The thought was so cold, so vile. It made her sick. He wasn't a savior. He was a bounty man. He had found her, brought her in, and was just waiting. Waiting for what? For her to heal? For the past to open? Was he going to take her back to Kane? Or take Kane's head? And what about her? The trust she had so carefully, tentatively built, crumbled into ash. She was still sitting there, the poster in her lap. When he returned a day later, he entered the cabin in a blast of cold air, his beard thick with ice. "Snow's coming again, hard," he said, dropping his pack. Then he saw her. He saw her pale, rigid face, and the paper in her hand. His body went still. He did not move for his rifle. He just watched her, his eyes unreadable. "He's worth $500, Clara said, her voice a dead, hollow thing. Silas looked at the poster, then back at her. "So they say. Is that why you're here?" she whispered, the accusation hanging between them, sharp as a blade. "Is that why you saved me? To trade me, or to use me to find him?" He did not get angry. He did not defend himself. He just looked tired. "I'm a trapper. Clara. I hunt beaver. I hunt foxes. I ain't a man-hunter." "But you have this," she said, holding up the poster. He sighed, a long, weary sound. He unlaced his heavy boots, his movements slow. "I was in Cheyenne 3 months ago. Stocking supplies. A man in a saloon gave it to me. He was giving them to every man who looked like he could handle a rifle." He sat in his chair, rubbing his raw hands together. "I knew the name. Heard the talk. A bad man. A man with an army. A man who owns marshals. $500 ain't enough to get you killed by a man like that. It's an insult." "So you just kept it?" "I kept it," he said, his voice flat. "To remind me what kind of trouble to stay away from. I came to this valley to be away from men like Cain, and men like you." Clara stared. He had refused it. He had refused the bounty, not from goodness, but from pragmatism. He had not wanted the trouble, and she, by stumbling into his camp, had brought the trouble right to his door. The revelation broke something in her. Not her trust, something deeper. The last wall, the last secret. He had been honest. He deserved the same. He didn't just run my father off," Clara said, her voice barely audible. The poster fell from her lap. Silas looked up. He was listening. "Cain," she said, the name like acid. "He came to our farm. My father was a good man, a proud man. He wouldn't sell. He said the water was for everyone." She closed her eyes. "So Cain and his men, they lynched him. They hung him from our own porch, and they made me watch." Silas's face tightened, but he said nothing. "I ran. I got as far as the town, but he owns the town. He found me. He brought me to his ranch." Her voice was shaking so hard she had to grip the cot to stay upright. "He said I owed him. For my father's debts. He said I would work it off. He put me in a room. He locked the door." She was suffocating. The cabin was too hot. "I was his," she choked out. "His property. For 2 years, I tried to leave. The first time, I tried to run. I stole a horse. I didn't get 5 miles. She was sobbing now, great, tearing gasps that hurt her chest. His men, they caught me. They brought me back. And he said property needs to be marked, so it can be returned." She could not breathe. She was back there, in the dirt, the smell of the fire, the hot iron. He held me down." Silas stood up. He moved so fast, she flinched. He was in front of her, kneeling. "Clara," he said, his voice rough. "Breathe." "He marked me," she wept, her body shaking, her mind lost in the past. "He marked me like a cow." "Clara." He gripped her shoulders. His hands were hard, calloused, but they were grounding her. "You are here. You are not there. You are here." You have to see," she said, her voice frantic. She had to make him understand. The shame, the reason she ran. "You have to see why I'm ruined." She was fumbling with her skirt, her hands clumsy. He thought she was having a fit. "Clara, stop." "No." She stood, her hands at her waist, her fingers tearing at the ties of her rough wool skirt. "You have to see what he did." She shoved the skirt down. She was wearing thin cotton drawers. Her hands went to the side, to her thigh. She pulled the fabric, her fingers trembling. "He did this," she whispered. There, high on the outside of her left thigh, was the scar. It was not a faint, white line. It was a brand. A thick, raised, and twisted keloid of flesh. A crude, Hateful JC seared into her skin. It was ugly. It was permanent. It was a mark of ownership. She stood before him, shaking, her shame laid bare, her entire body braced for the disgust, the pity, the recoil. Silas looked at the scar. He did not move for a long time. His face was granite. He just stared at the ugly mark, his breathing shallow. Clara's sobs quieted. She just waited, empty and cold, for the final rejection. Then he moved. He did not recoil. He did not look away. He lifted his hand, his rough, scarred fingers trembling. He reached out, slowly, as if not to frighten a wild animal. His fingers hovered over the scar, then, so gently she almost did not feel it. He touched her. His calloused fingertips traced the raised, hateful letters. Clara gasped, a sharp, broken sound. No one had touched that scar. She had hidden it, bathed in the dark, and kept it covered. He knelt, his head bent, his touch reverent. He was not touching a brand. He was touching a wound. He was, she realized, touching her pain. He lowered his head, his beard, rough and warm, brushed her skin. And then he did something that shattered her world. He pressed his lips to the scar. It was not a kiss of passion. It was a kiss of absolution. It was a benediction. He kissed the ugliest, most shamed part of her. And in that one simple, devastating act, he told her she was not ruined. She was not dirt. She broke. The last of her strength, the last of her defenses dissolved. Her legs gave out. He caught her. He wrapped his arms around her, lifting her as if she weighed nothing, and carried her to the cot. He sat, holding her, his arms a steel cage. As she wept, she cried for her father. She cried for her lost years. She cried for the pain and the shame, letting it all pour out into the rough buckskin of his shirt. He just held her. He rocked her, his hand stroking her hair, whispering one word, over and over. I know. I know. They stayed like that for hours. The fire burned low. The cabin grew dark. Nora slept, oblivious, on her small pallet of furs. Finally, her tears were spent. She was empty. She lay against his chest, her breathing ragged, his heart a steady, thrumming beat beneath her ear. He will come for me, she whispered in the dark. He will never stop. I know, Silas said. She pulled back, just enough to see his face in the dying firelight. The tension, the anger, was gone. His eyes were dark, and they were full of a terrible, shared sorrow. I ran to save Nora, she said. I found I was... Don't, he said. I have to... I'm a child, his child. The confession was a stone dropped into a deep well. Silas did not flinch. He just held her gaze. He had known. He must have known. The sickness, the weakness. He closed his eyes, a deep pain passing over his features. He gently, his hand shaking, laid his palm flat on her belly. Clara, he said, his voice thick. It was then that she kissed him. She leaned in, her bandaged hand coming up to cup his bearded cheek, and pressed her lips to his. It was a kiss of desperation. It was a kiss of gratitude. It was a kiss that said, You are the first man to touch me with kindness in 3 years. He was still for a second, a statue of iron. Then, with a low groan that seemed torn from his very soul, he kissed her back. His mouth was hard, chapped, tasting of coffee in the cold. He was not gentle. It was not a gentle kiss. It was a kiss of hunger, of a man starved for feeling, for life. His arms crushed her. His hand tangled in her hair, pulling her close. This was not love. It was something more primal. It was a collision. It was two broken souls crashing together in the dark, seeking friction, seeking heat, seeking proof that they were, in fact, still alive. He laid her back on the furs. There were no words. There was no seduction. There was only a desperate, mutual need. Their movements were fierce, almost violent. A battle against the cold, against the past. They were clawing their way back to the world of the living. His hands were rough, her skin was tender, and in that small, smoky cabin, under the weight of the snow, They made love. It was slow, and it was fierce, and it was full of whispered regrets and a desperate, shared hunger. Afterward, they lay tangled in the furs, their bodies slick with sweat, the silence of the cabin absolute. Clara felt quiet. The shame was gone. The fear was gone. For the first time, she felt safe. She turned to look at him and found he was crying. Silas, the mountain of a man, the hunter, the silent shadow, was lying on his back, his arm thrown over his face, his broad shoulders shaking with silent, racking sobs. "Silas," she whispered, terrified. He did not, or could not, answer. He was breaking, the way a dam breaks, a 5-year wall of ice and grief shattering all at once. Clara sat up. She did not know what to do. She tentatively touched his shoulder. He grabbed her hand, his grip like a vice, and pulled it to his chest. Don't go. I'm here," she said. "I'm not going." He took his arm away from his face. His eyes were red, his face streaked with tears. He looked at her, his gaze raw, unprotected. "I had a daughter," he choked out, the words ripped from him. "Her name was Lizzie. She had dark eyes, like your girl. She would have been 9 years old." Clara's heart stopped. "And Sarah," he said the name as if it were a prayer. "My wife, she had hair like corn silk. I was gone," he told her. In the dark, his voice cracking, he told her everything. The cattle drive, the smoke, the smell of his life burning, the small, melted doll. "I should have been there," he wept, the guilt of 5 years pouring out. "I should have been. I wasn't there. I was away. And they... "Shh," Clara said. She did not have words. There were no words for this. She pulled his head onto her lap. She stroked his hair, his rough, matted hair, the way she would stroke Nora's. She held him. He confessed his ghosts. She had confessed her scars. In the small, dark cabin, surrounded by the howling wind, the two of them, a man who had lost everything and a woman who had never had anything, cried together. The last walls were gone. There was nothing left to hide. The morning after their confession, the world was reborn, sharp and silent. The cabin, which had been a refuge, was now a tinderbox, filled with the ghosts they had shared and the new, fragile thing they had built. Clara awoke first. She was still in his arms, her head on his chest, their legs tangled in the heavy furs. He was asleep, his breathing deep and steady. In sleep, his face was younger, the lines of grief and anger smoothed away. She listened to his heart, a strong, slow beat beneath her ear, and for the first time since her father died, she did not feel alone. She slipped from the cot, the movement careful. The floor was ice cold on her bare feet. Nora was still asleep, her small face peaceful. Her new wooden horse clutched in her hand. Clara moved to the hearth, her body aching, but in a new way, a good way. She added a log to the glowing coals, and as the fire caught, she stood, watching the flames. She was a different woman than the one who had stumbled into this valley. The door creaked. She spun, her heart leaping into her throat, grabbing the iron poker. Silas was awake, sitting up on the cot. He was watching her. "It's just me," he said, his voice a low rumble. Their eyes met, and the shared memory of the night, the confessions, the passion, hung in the air, heavy and warm. She started, not knowing what to say. He swung his legs over the side of the cot and stood. He was a mountain of a man, bare-chested in the dim light, his body a map of old scars and hard muscle. He walked to her, not with the anger of before, but with a new, quiet purpose. He did not kiss her. He just put his hands on her shoulders, his thumbs rubbing the skin, warming her. "You all right?" She nodded, her throat too tight to speak. "Good," he said, his voice rough. "Get dressed. Get the girl dressed. I'm checking the ridge." An hour later, he was gone. and the cabin was filled with the smell of coffee and the sound of Nora chattering to her doll. Clara was washing the tin plates when the door opened again. He was back, far too soon. She knew, before he even spoke. She knew. His face was a mask of granite, the one she had first seen. The cold, distant hunter was back. "Silas, get your things," he said, his voice flat. He went to his rifle, checking the load. "All of them. What you can carry. What is it? What did you see?" "Tracks." He said the word as if it were a curse. 3 men, on horseback, coming up the south draw. They're good. They're not trappers. Clara's blood ran cold. The tin plate slipped from her hand, clattering on the floor. "Kane," she whispered. "It's them," he said. He did not ask. He knew. "They're a day out, maybe less, if they push their animals. They found my trap line. They're following it." Nora, sensing the change in the air, went silent, her eyes wide. "We have to run," Clara said, her voice frantic. She grabbed Nora, pulling the child into her skirts. "We have to go, now, out the back, into the trees." "No." "What do you mean, no? They're coming. He will kill us. He will kill us all." "You run. You die," Silas said, his voice sharp, cutting through her panic. "You run into that snow, with a child, and they will track you down before you've gone 5 miles. You'll be tired, you'll be cold, and you'll be in the open. They will run you down like a deer." "So we stay?" she cried, her voice cracking. "We stay here and let them walk in and—" "This is my ground," Silas said, his eyes hard. He tapped the log wall. "This is my home. I know every rock, every tree, every hollow in this valley. They don't. They come in here. They're walking into my trap, not the other way around." He grabbed her shoulders, forcing her to look at him. "I will not let him take you. I will not let him touch you or that child." She looked into his eyes, and she saw it. The grief was still there, but beneath it was a resolve as hard as the mountain itself. He was not the man who had hidden in his grief. He was the man who had survived it. "But, Silas, there are 3 of them. Maybe more. You're one man. I'm one man who knows where they'll be." He gave her a small, rough shake. "But you're right. I need you." "Me?" "You," he said. "Are you the woman who cries by the fire, or are you the woman who learned to hit a can at 50 yards? Her breath caught. He was offering her a choice. Not as a victim, as a partner. "I will not run," she said, her voice low and steady. A new, cold fire building in her belly. "I will not run from him. Not again." "Good," Silas said. A faint, grim smile touched his lips. "Then we have work to do. A lot of it, before sundown." The next 8 hours were a blur of frantic, organized labor. The cabin was no longer a home. It was a fortress. "First, the horses," Silas said. He led his 2 pack animals from the small, lean-to barn. "They're a liability. The men will see them and know we're here, or they'll steal them. We're hiding them. Up the North Ridge, in the old bear cave." It took an hour, forcing the reluctant animals up a steep, snow-covered game trail. But he was right. The cave was deep, sheltered, and invisible from the valley floor. "Now, supplies," he said, back at the cabin. "We take what we need to survive. The rest, we hide. If they take the cabin, I don't want them feasting on my food." They packed dried meat, flour, and ammunition into 2 canvas sacks. The rest of the food, the barrels of salt and flour, they buried in a deep snowdrift 100 yards from the cabin, under a thicket of spruce. "Clara," he called, his voice muffled from inside the cabin. He emerged with a heavy coil of rope and his spare axe. "I need you to dig." "Dig?" He pointed to a spot 20 yards in front of the cabin, in a natural, shallow depression. "Dig a trench, as deep as you can, a semicircle. From that pine to that rock, I'm going to set a fire trap. If they come, I want to give them a welcome." As she dug, the work hard and her breath pluming, she watched him. He moved with a terrifying, efficient grace. He was in his element. He climbed the tall pines around the cabin, sawing off lower branches, creating clear firing lines. He set snares, not to catch rabbits, but man-sized, heavy-gauge wire loops on the trails leading to the cabin, just under the snow. He blocked the small back window of the cabin, the parchment one, boarding it up from the inside. "They'll come from the front," he said. "This is a box. We're the bait. The door is the only way in. And it's a killing field." Clara finished the trench. Her back ached. Her hands were raw. "Good," Silas said, inspecting her work. He filled the trench with dry tinder, pine branches, and then, from his stores, poured a full tin of lamp oil over it. "A fire ditch. If they're on foot, they'll have to cross it, and they'll be lit up like Christmas." As the sun began to dip, painting the snow-covered peaks in hues of blood and orange, the work was done. The valley was silent. The cabin looked just as it had, a simple, lonely trapper's hut. But it was not. It was a trap. They returned inside. The cabin was dark, the front window now shuttered, leaving only a small crack for a rifle. The air was thick with tension. Clara went to the cot, her body trembling with exhaustion. Silas followed. He did not sit at the table, or on his bedroll. He sat on the cot beside her. The fear, held at bay by the work, rushed back in. "Silas, I'm scared." He took her hand. His was rough, calloused, and covered in pine pitch. Hers was sore and trembling. He laced his fingers through hers. "I know," he said, his voice quiet. "Fear is good. It keeps you sharp. Don't let it take over. You hold on to me." He raised her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles. It was a gesture of such profound tenderness, so at odds with the violence they were preparing for, that it broke her. She leaned in, and he met her, his mouth finding hers in the dim light. The kiss was not the desperate, hungry crash of the night before. It was slow and deep and full of a terrible, aching sweetness. It was a kiss of farewell and a kiss of promise. "I wish," she whispered against his lips. "I wish we had more time." "We have now," he said, "and we'll have tomorrow. I promise you, I will get you, and that girl, and the baby, out of this valley." He had said it. He had acknowledged the child growing inside her. He was not just fighting for her. He was fighting for them. They did not make love. They lay on the cot, fully dressed, their rifles beside them. They held each other, their hands clasped tight. It was an intimacy that went deeper than passion. It was the simple, desperate comfort of two souls bracing for the end of the world and finding their solace in the dark. They fell asleep like that, in the silence, holding hands. The sound that woke them was a small one, a whimper. Clara was on her feet instantly. Nora was sitting up on her pallet, her face pale in the moonlight, her eyes wide with terror. "Mama," the child whispered, her voice shaking. "Mama, I heard you talking." Clara rushed to her, pulling her into an embrace. "Shh, baby, it's all right. It was just a bad dream." "No," Nora said, her small body trembling. You said men are coming. You said fight." Her voice broke. Is Papa coming? Is my real Papa coming? The name, Jasper Kane, hung in the air. A poison." Clara's heart broke. She looked at Silas, helpless. Silas, who had been a wall of stone, softened. He knelt, so he was on the girl's level. He looked, Clara thought, like a large, gentle bear. "Nora," he said, his voice low and calm. Your other Papa isn't coming. He can't find you. We're safe here." "But you're scared," Nora said, with the simple, devastating honesty of a child. I can feel it. Mama is scared." Clara couldn't deny it. She held Nora tight. "Yes, baby, Mama is a little scared. There are some bad men in the world, and they're lost. We're just being quiet, so they don't bother us." But you said fight," Nora insisted, her lower lip trembling. I don't want to fight. "Oh, baby," Clara said, her own tears starting to well. How could she explain this? She took a deep breath. She looked at Silas, at his steady, quiet strength, and she knew what to say. "Nora Bug," she whispered, turning the child's face to hers. "Do you remember when we were alone, in the snow? How cold was it?" Nora nodded, her eyes dark. "And do you remember how we were all alone?" "Yes, we're not alone anymore." Clara's voice was fierce and low. We have Silas. He's a good man. He's a strong man. And he's worth staying for. We've finally found someone worth staying for. And worth fighting for, sometimes. Baby, you have to fight for the good things." Nora looked at Silas. She looked at this big, bearded man who had given her a doll and who had, for weeks, been a silent, forbidding presence. She reached out a small, trembling hand. Silas did not hesitate. He covered her hand with his own. His hand was huge, completely enveloping hers. "I will keep you safe, Nora," he said. It was a vow. "I will not let anyone hurt you or your mama. You have my word." Nora seemed to understand. The terror faded from her eyes, replaced by a child's simple, profound trust. She nodded. "Okay, Silas." She lay back down, her doll in one arm, her other hand still holding onto Clara's. She was asleep in minutes. Clara stood, her legs shaking, and walked back to Silas. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, pulling her back against his chest. "You're a good mother, Clara," he whispered into her hair. "I'm not," she said, her voice thick. I'm bringing this all on you." "No," he said, his grip tightening. You brought me back." "I was a ghost. I was dead. You and her." He didn't finish. He didn't need to. They stood by the cold hearth, holding each other. As the first flakes of snow began to fall, the snow did not stop. For 3 days, the world disappeared. It was not a gentle, silent snow. It was a blizzard, a howling, screaming, white-walled monster that descended on the valley. The wind shrieked, a constant, high-pitched wail that sounded like 1,000 mourning women. The cabin creaked and groaned under the weight of the snow, the logs popping under the pressure. They were trapped, utterly. The work they had done, the traps, the fire ditch, was buried under 4 feet of new snow. "They're not coming," Clara said. "On the second day," she was trying to convince herself. "No one could move in this. They're gone. They turned back." "No," Silas said. He was pacing, a caged animal. He had not slept. "They're out there. They're like me. They know how to wait out a storm." He looked out the small slit in the shutter. "They'll be dug in the trees, in a hollow. They're just waiting." The food began to dwindle. The supplies they had packed for a fight were now the only supplies they had. The cabin was a small, dark, cold box. They kept the fire low to conserve wood and huddled together under the firs for warmth. The 3 of them, a strange, broken, and desperate family. The tension was suffocating. Every blast of wind was a footstep. Every creak of the roof was a man on the porch. On the 3rd night, the storm broke, the wind died, and a terrible, profound silence fell over the valley. The world was lit by a full, cold moon, making the new fallen snow so bright it was like daylight. Clara had not slept. She lay on the cot, Nora breathing softly beside her, and watched Silas. He was not pacing. He was sitting on the floor, by the door, his back against the wall. His rifle was across his lap. He was completely still. He was not breathing. He was listening. "Silas?" she whispered, the sound of betrayal in the silence. He did not turn. He just held up a hand. She listened. She heard nothing, only the pounding of her own heart. Then she heard it. It was not a sound. It was a feeling, a faint crunch of snow, but not the wind. It was measured, a footstep. Clara sat up, her hand flying to her mouth. Silas rose, silent as a shadow. He moved to the small slit in the shutter and peered out. He was there for a long time, a minute, 2. When he turned, His face, in the moonlight, was pale. He moved to the cot, knelt beside her, and took her hand. He was ice cold. "Clara," he whispered, his voice so low she had to strain to hear it. "They're here, in the trees. I see 2, maybe 3. She nodded, her body numb. He raised her hand, kissed her palm, and then folded her fingers over the spot. "You stay here. You keep Nora quiet, no matter what you hear. Do you understand me?" She nodded again. He stood, moved to the door, and took his position. He was a statue of death, his rifle aimed at the door. Clara woke, hours later, from a fitful, adrenaline-fueled doze. The moon had moved. The cabin was darker. She looked. Silas was gone. "Silas?" she whispered, panic rising. A floorboard creaked by the door. She looked. He was there. He had not moved an inch. He was just waiting. She must have dreamed he had moved. She lay back, her heart a trip hammer. She closed her eyes. Just for a second. She woke to his voice. He was at her side, his hand on her shoulder. "Clara!" She sat up, her mind foggy. What is it?" He was looking at the door, his face a mask of terrible, listening calm. His rifle was in his hand. "They're close," he whispered. "They're on the porch." The wind had died, but the valley was far from silent. Silas stood by the door, his body rigid, his ear pressed against the rough wood. The silence that followed his whisper was heavy, a suffocating blanket that seemed to press against the very walls of the cabin. Clara remained on the cot, her hands gripping the heavy wool blanket, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Nora lay beside her, still in the deep, innocent sleep of childhood, oblivious to the death waiting on the porch. Then, the sound changed. It was not the heavy thud of a boot. It was scratching, a low, guttural snarl that vibrated through the timbers. Silas pulled back, his brow furrowed. He moved to the small, shuttered slit he had preserved for his rifle. He peered out into the moonlit snow. Wolves, the carcass of the deer Silas had butchered days ago, the offal he had buried too shallowly in the frozen earth near the woodpile, had drawn them back. The storm had starved them, and the scent of blood, however old, had cut through the ice. They were there, a pack of 6 or 7, gaunt shadows circling the cabin, their yellow eyes reflecting the cold light of the moon. But they were not looking at the meat. They were looking at the trees. The wolves sensed what Silas had sensed. They smelled the men. Suddenly, the night shattered. A gunshot cracked from the tree line, a flash of orange fire blooming in the darkness. One of the wolves yelped, spinning in the snow before collapsing. The pack exploded into chaos, snarling and snapping, turning on the unseen threat in the shadows. "Get down," Silas roared. He did not wait. He shoved the barrel of his Winchester through the slit and fired. The report was deafening in the small space, the smell of sulfur instantly filling the air. Outside, a man screamed. "They're here!" Silas yelled, working the lever of his rifle with a metallic clack. "Clara, get the girl! Get her behind the stove!" Clara moved on instinct. She grabbed Nora, who woke with a shriek, and dragged the terrified child across the floor. She shoved her into the narrow, dark space behind the cast-iron stove, piling firewood in front of the opening to create a barrier. "Stay there," Clara commanded, her voice hard and unrecognizable to her own ears. "Do not make a sound. Do not come out." Nora was sobbing, but she curled into a ball, burying her face in her knees. The cabin erupted. Bullets slammed into the logs, sending splinters flying like deadly rain. The heavy wood held, but the noise was a continuous, thunderous roar. Silas was moving, firing, moving again. He was a machine of war, his face set in a grimace of concentration. "3 of them!" Silas shouted over the din. "They're using the wolves as cover! They're coming for the door!" The wolves, caught between the men and the cabin, were a frenzy of teeth and fur. The attackers were shooting them, kicking them, using the chaos to advance. A heavy weight slammed into the front door. The bar held, groaning under the impact. "Open up!" a voice bellowed. "Open up or we burn you out!" It was not Jasper Kane. It was one of his foremen, a man named Pike. Clara knew that voice. She had heard it laugh while she cried. Silas turned to her. "The oil lamp. Get it ready." Clara grabbed the kerosene lamp from the table. Her hands were shaking, but she held it tight. Another impact hit the door. The wood splintered around the hinges. "Now!" Silas yelled. He fired through the door, blindly. 3 shots in rapid succession. A curse rang out from the porch, followed by the sound of a body hitting the planks. But they were not stopping. The window to the right, the one Silas had boarded up, shattered inward. A gun barrel poked through, flashing fire. Silas spun and fired, silencing the gunman. But in that second of distraction, the front door gave way. With a crash that shook the foundation, the heavy oak door flew open. A man stood there, silhouetted by the moonlight and the snow. He was huge, wearing a buffalo coat, a revolver in each hand. He stepped over the body of his comrade on the porch. Silas swung his rifle, but the man was faster. He fired. The bullet caught Silas in the left shoulder. The impact spun him around, his rifle clattering to the floor. He hit the wall and slid down, clutching his shoulder, blood already dark and slick between his fingers. "Silas!" Clara screamed. The man in the doorway laughed. He stepped inside, kicking the door shut behind him against the wind. He looked at Silas, bleeding on the floor, and then he turned his eyes to Clara. It was Pike. His face was scarred, his teeth yellow in the gloom. "Well now," Pike said, holstering one gun and stepping toward her. "Boss wants you back. Clara, alive." But he didn't say anything about being undamaged. He lunged. Clara did not run. She did not scream. She had spent years running. She had spent years screaming. She had the skinning knife, the one Silas had used to crave the horse, the one she had used to cut the vegetables. She had tucked it into her belt when the shooting started. As Pike reached for her, his hand closing around her throat, Clara drove the knife upward with every ounce of strength she possessed. She did not aim for the chest. She aimed for the soft, unprotected space beneath his jaw. Just as Silas had taught her to dress a deer. The blade sank into the hilt. Pike's eyes went wide. His grip on her throat tightened for a second, crushing her windpipe, and then went slack. He made a wet, gurgling sound. He staggered back, clawing at the handle protruding from his neck, and collapsed onto the floor, twitching. Clara stood over him, gasping for air, her hands covered in his blood. She felt nothing, no horror, no regret, only a cold, hard satisfaction. "Clara." Silas's voice was weak. She turned. He was trying to stand, his face gray. There's more. Outside." She rushed to him, grabbing his good arm. "Can you walk?" "I can shoot," he grunted. "My rifle. Give me my rifle." She handed him the Winchester. He used it as a crutch to stand. "The ditch," Silas rasped. "We have to light the ditch. They're waiting for Pike to bring you out. When he doesn't, they'll rush us." "How?" Clara asked. "The lamp is broken." The kerosene lamp had been smashed in the fight, oil pooling uselessly on the floorboards. Silas looked at the fire in the hearth. Then he looked at the heavy wool blanket on the cot. "Soak the blanket in the oil," he ordered. "Light it. Throw it out the door." Clara grabbed the blanket. She dragged it through the puddle of kerosene on the floor, the fabric drinking up the fuel. She threw it into the hearth. It caught instantly, flaring up with a whoosh of heat and orange flame. "Open the door," Silas yelled. Clara kicked the broken door open. The wind howled in, fanning the flames on the blanket she held with the iron poker. Outside, 20 yards away, 2 dark shapes were crouched in the snow, rifles trained on the cabin. "Now!" Clara heaved the burning mass out onto the porch. It landed in the snow, sizzling, but the wind caught the flames. Sparks flew. One spark, carried by the gale, landed in the depression Clara had dug, the trench she had filled with pine needles, dry wood, and gallons of lamp oil. The world turned white. The fire ditch erupted. A wall of flame, 10 feet high, roared into existence, encircling the front of the cabin in a semicircle of inferno. The sudden heat was intense. melting the snow instantly and sending a plume of black smoke into the night sky. The two men in the yard were caught off guard. The sudden light blinded them. The heat drove them back. "Silas!" Clara yelled. Silas stepped into the doorway, his left arm hanging useless, his right arm propping the rifle against the doorframe. He was silhouetted against the fire, a demon of vengeance. He fired, once, twice. One of the men in the snow dropped, clutching his leg. The other man, seeing Pike dead, his partner down, and a wall of fire between him and his prey, threw his rifle into the snow. He raised his hands, screaming over the roar of the flames. "Don't shoot! I yield! I yield!" Silas held his aim for a long, terrible second. His finger tightened on the trigger. He wanted to kill him. He wanted to end it all. "Silas," Clara said, placing her hand on the barrel of the rifle. "Enough. It's done." Silas lowered the gun. He sagged against the doorframe, the adrenaline fading, leaving only the pain. "It's done," he whispered. Morning broke over a valley that looked like a battlefield. The fire in the ditch had burned itself out, leaving a scorched, black scar in the pristine white snow. The bodies of two wolves lay near the woodpile. Pike lay inside the cabin, covered by a sheet. The man Silas had shot in the leg was groaning in the snow. Tied to the hitching post, the last man, the one who had surrendered, sat on the ground near the porch, his hands bound behind his back. He was shivering, his face pale with cold and fear. Clara stood on the porch. She was barefoot, her feet numb to the cold. She wore her blood-stained dress, her hair wild and tangled. She held Silas's Winchester in her hands. She did not look like a victim. She looked like a queen of the winter. She walked down the steps, the snow crunching under her feet. She approached the bound man. He looked up at her, and she saw the terror in his eyes. He knew who she was. He knew what she had done to Pike. "Where is he?" Clara asked. Her voice was calm, steady. He didn't come," the man stammered. "Kane, he stayed at the ranch. He sent us, said it was an easy job, said you were just a girl." Clara looked down at him. He was wrong. She turned to the man Silas had shot in the leg. He was unconscious, his breathing shallow. She knelt beside him and began to search his coat pockets. "What are you doing?" the bound man asked. "Looking for reasons not to kill you," she said. She found a pouch of tobacco, a few coins, and a thick leather wallet. She opened it. Inside were papers, a map of the territory, and a bundle of letters, tied with twine. Clara pulled the letters out. She unfolded the first one. The handwriting was jagged, aggressive. It was Kane's. She read. Her eyes widened. "To Marshall Davies. The shipment of 3 girls from the settlement arrived. They are young, as requested. Payment is enclosed. Ensure the parents are told it was fever. Do not fail me. J. Kane." She read the next one, and the next. They were a ledger of horrors. Trafficking, bribery, murder. Kane was not just a rancher. He was a monster who sold women and children across the territory to minors and brothels, paying off the law to look the other way. This was not just proof of her abuse. This was a noose. Clara folded the letters carefully and put them in the pocket of her dress. She looked at the bound man. "You knew?" she said. "I just ride for the brand." "Miss," he pleaded, "I just do what I'm told." "You knew," she repeated. "And you came for my daughter." She raised the rifle. The man squeezed his eyes shut, whimpering. Clara held it there for a moment, the weight of the steel heavy in her hands. She could end him. It would be easy. It would be justice. But then she heard the door creak. Nora was standing there. The child was holding her wooden horse, watching her mother. Clara lowered the rifle. She would not let Kane turn her into a murderer. She had killed to save her life. She would not kill for sport. "Get up," she told the man. "Put your friend on his horse. You're leaving." "Leaving?" The man blinked, confused. "You go back to Kane," Clara said, her voice ice. "You tell him Pike is dead. You tell him his men are broken. And you tell him I have the letters. You tell him if he ever sends another man after me, if I ever see his face again, I will send these letters to the governor." I will send them to the papers in the East. I will burn his world to ash." The man nodded, scrambling to his feet. "Yes, ma'am, I'll tell him. I swear." They loaded the wounded man onto a horse. The surrendered man mounted his own. He looked at Clara one last time, terror and awe warring in his face, before spurring his horse into a gallop, fleeing the valley as if the devil herself were at his heels. Clara watched them go until they were black specks against the snow. Then, and only then, did she allow herself to tremble. She turned back to the cabin. Silas was sitting at the table. He had dragged himself to the chair. His shirt was cut away, revealing the ugly, dark hole in his shoulder. His skin was pale, glistening with sweat. "They're gone," he rasped. "They're gone," Clara said. She leaned the rifle against the wall and went to the fire. She put a pot of water on to boil. She found the needle and the spool of silk thread. She found the bottle of whiskey, miraculously unbroken. She poured a cup and brought it to him. "Drink." He downed it in one swallow, grimacing. "The bullet?" "It went through," she said, inspecting the wound. "Clean exit, but you've lost blood, and the muscle is torn." "Stitch it," he said. He gripped the edge of the table with his good hand. "Do it." Clara washed her hands. She threaded the needle. She poured whiskey over the wound. Silas hissed, his body going rigid, the cords in his neck standing out, but he did not cry out. Clara began to sew. Her hands, which had once been soft, which had played the piano in her father's house, were now steady and ruthless. She pierced the skin, pulled the thread tight, and tied the knots. "Talk to me," Silas gritted out, his eyes squeezed shut. "Distract me." "I found letters," Clara said, her voice calm as she worked. "In their pockets. Cain. He's selling women, selling children, to the mines, to the camps." Silas opened his eyes. Pain and anger warred in his gaze. "He's a dead man." "Yes," Clara said. "But not by a bullet. Not yet. I have the proof. I have his signature. I have the names of the marshals he pays." She finished the last stitch and tied it off. She took a clean cloth, soaked it in water, and gently wiped the blood from his chest. "We have him, Silas. We don't have to run anymore. We have the power." Silas looked at her. He looked at the blood on her dress, the steel in her eyes. He reached up with his good hand and touched her cheek. "You saved us," he whispered. I thought I was the protector, but you saved me." "We saved each other," she said. She bandaged his shoulder, wrapping the linen tight. Then she helped him stand, guiding him to the cot. He was heavy, leaning on her, but she bore his weight easily. She tucked him in, pulling the furs up to his chin. "Rest now," she said. "I'll watch the door." "Clara," he mumbled, his eyes closing as the exhaustion and the whiskey took hold. "Where do we go? When the snow melts?" Clara walked to the window. She looked out at the pristine white valley. The smoke from the fire ditch was fading. The sun was rising, painting the peaks in gold. "We're going to the capital," she said, though he was already asleep. "We go to the governor. We deliver the letters. We bury Jasper Kane." She turned back to the room. Nora had crept out from her hiding place. The child walked to the cot and looked at Silas. "Is he sleeping?" Nora whispered. "Yes," Clara said. "He's sleeping." "Is he going to wake up?" "Yes," Clara smiled, a true, genuine smile that reached her eyes. "He's going to wake up, and then—" "We're going to go home." "Where is home?" Nora asked. Clara looked at the man sleeping on the cot. She looked at the rough log walls. She looked at the child holding her hand. "I don't know yet," Clara said softly. "But we'll find it, together." She sat in the chair by the door, the rifle across her lap, and watched the sun climb higher into the sky. For the first time in her life, she was not afraid of the day to come. The weeks that followed the battle were a strange, quiet dream, suspended in the deepening cold of the high country winter. The first days were a blur of grim necessity. Silas, feverish and weak, directed Clara as she dragged Pike's body, along with the other 2 dead men, to a deep ravine far from the cabin. She covered them with stones and snow, a makeshift tomb, her hands steady, her heart cold. The man who had surrendered, the one she had sent back with a message, was gone. The valley was theirs again. But the balance had shifted. Silas, the hunter, the rock-solid provider, was now the dependent. His wound, though clean, had taken much of his strength. The fever lasted 3 days, and in that time, Clara did not sleep. She sat by the cot, bathing his face, forcing broth and willow bark tea down his throat, and watching his chest rise and fall. She was terrified, not of the outside world, but of the silence that would fill the cabin if his breathing stopped. He woke on the 4th day, his eyes clear, his fever broken. He looked at her exhausted, smudged face, and his good hand found hers. "You're still here," he'd whispered. "I'm not going anywhere," she replied, her voice fierce, as his body mended. The cabin settled into a new rhythm. The winter locked them in, but it was no longer a prison. It was a cocoon. Weeks passed. The snow remained, a thick, clean blanket over the valley. One afternoon, a man appeared on the ridge, leading a mule. It was a trader, an old acquaintance of Silas's named Jed. Silas had been expecting him, part of his regular trapping route. Clara met him on the porch, Silas standing behind her in the doorway, his arm in a sling, his rifle in his good hand. "Silas," Jed said, his eyes wide, taking in Clara, the child peeking from behind her skirts, and the new, hard set of Silas's jaws. "Figured the storm had buried you." "It tried," Silas said. "This is Clara and Nora." Clara stepped forward. She was carrying a small, oilskin-wrapped package. "The letters." "Jed," she said, her voice clear and strong. "We have a favor. We need you to take this to the territorial marshal in Cheyenne, not the local one. The territorial marshal, a man named Bell." Jed looked from her to Silas. His curiosity piqued. "There's $20 for your trouble," Silas said, "and a bale of my best beaver pelts. But you tell no one you saw us. And you tell no one who gave you this. You just deliver it." Jed, seeing the look in Silas's eyes and the unyielding strength in Clara's, took the package. "Marshal Bell, Cheyenne, got it. Consider it done. Silas, I ain't seen nothing but snow." He took the pelts, made his trades, and was gone by noon. Clara stood on the porch, watching him disappear. She had set the fire. Now, all she could do was wait for it to burn. As Silas healed, he was forced into a new role. He sat by the fire, restless and frustrated, his body itching to move. So he taught. "No, not like that," he'd rasp. As Clara came in, hauling a bucket of water, the yoke clumsy on her shoulders. "Balance it. Let the weight settle. Don't fight it." He taught her how to read the traps. He taught her how to clean the rifle, her movements becoming as precise and economical as his. He taught her how to track, pointing from the window at the snow. "See that? That's a fox. He's light on his feet. That's a buck. He's heavy, dragging his feet. He's tired." Clara, in turn, tended the horses, her hands gentle and sure. She learned to bank the fire, to predict the weather, to live with the mountain instead of against it. She was no longer a refugee. She was a resident. And Silas, unable to pace, turned his attention to Nora. His hands, restless, began to carve. The simple horse was joined by a bear, a wolf, and a small, intricate bird. He was gruff, but his patience with the child was infinite. He taught her how to tie a slip knot. "This," he said, his big, rough hand guiding her small fingers, "is how you snare a rabbit. You find his trail. You see where he likes to run, and you wait." Nora, her face a mask of concentration, would practice for an hour, the small piece of twine becoming a source of intense pride. She would sing to his carvings, her high, clear voice, a sound Silas had not realized he had missed as much as breathing. The news came with a thaw. Jed returned. 2 months later, as the first green shoots were pushing through the mud, the pass was still treacherous. But he had made the trip. He did not come to the cabin. He left a bundle at the edge of the clearing, salt, coffee, and a newspaper from Cheyenne. Silas went to get it, his arm now out of the sling, his shoulder stiff but usable. He brought the paper back, his face grim. He spread it on the table. Clara read the headline over his shoulder. Marshall moves on Kane Ranch. Territory-wide trafficking ring exposed. Marshall Davies arrested. The story was all there. The letters, the names, the ledger of horrors. Jasper Kane, it was reported, had not been taken. He had set fire to his own ranch house. Barricading himself inside, he had died in the flames. The fire consuming the empire he had built. A final, cowardly act of defiance. Kane was dead. Clara read the words, and felt nothing. Not triumph, not joy, not even relief. Just a profound, hollow emptiness. It was over. The monster from her past was a pile of ash. She looked at Silas. He was watching her, his face full of concern. She had expected to feel free. Instead, she just felt tired. She walked out of the cabin, leaving the newspaper on the table. She walked past the wood pile, past the scorched earth of the fire ditch, and into the woods, toward the sound of the river. Spring had come to the valley in a sudden, violent rush. The snow, which had been their prison and their shield, was gone, retreating up the high peaks. The ground was a riot of new life, the sharp, clean smell of pine and damp earth filling the air. The creek, which had been a frozen ribbon of ice, was now a roaring, churning torrent of snowmelt. It was a new world. Clara stood by the bank, the cold spray on her face. She was free. She was safe. Nora was safe. And yet, she felt stained. She felt the grime of the fight, the blood of Pike, the ash of Jasper Kane's ranch, clinging to her skin. She needed to be clean, slowly, deliberately. She began to unbutton her dress. The rough wool, the dress she had worn for months, the dress she had been wearing when she killed a man, fell to the muddy bank. She shed her underthings. She stood naked in the bright, cold sunlight. She looked at her body. Her stomach was rounding. The new life within her a gentle, undeniable swell. And on her thigh, the hateful brand, the mark of ownership. She was not ashamed. Not anymore. It was just a scar on a body that had survived. She stepped into the water. It was so cold it stole her breath. It was a baptism of ice, a shock that jolted her senses, washing away the smell of smoke, the feel of blood, the shadow of the cabin. She plunged under, her hair fanning out, and surfaced, gasping, her skin alive and tingling. She was washing her past away. When she turned, he was there. Silas stood on the bank, his buckskin shirt unlaced at the throat, his rifle held loosely in his hand. He had not been hunting. He had been watching. She did not flinch. She did not cover herself. She met his gaze, her head high. He looked at her. He looked at the woman in the water, her body strong and pale, the scar on her thigh, the swell of her belly. He saw no shame. He saw no victim. He saw the woman who had sown his flesh, who had stood beside him in a firefight, who had brought his dead heart back to life. "Clara," he said, his voice thick. "The water's cold," she said, a small, tentative smile on her lips. "But it's clean." She held out her hand, a come-hither gesture that was not a plea, but an invitation. He did not hesitate. He dropped the rifle on the bank and waded in, his boots and trousers still on. The water surged around his waist. He did not seem to feel the cold. He stopped in front of her. He reached up and touched her face, his thumb brushing the water from her cheek. "It's over," she whispered. "It's just beginning," he said. He kissed her. It was not the desperate, broken kiss of their first night. It was not the fearful, tender kiss before the battle. It was a kiss of profound, quiet certainty. It was the kiss of a man who had found the one thing he thought was lost forever. It was the kiss of two people who had survived death and chosen to live. They decided, that night, that they would leave the cabin, Silas said, looking around the small room that had become their world. "It's a good place. It's safe. We could add a room." Clara, who was packing their few belongings, stopped. She looked at him, at this strong, quiet man who was offering her a life. "The letters," she said. They were just the start. "Cain is dead. Cain is dead," she agreed. "But the man he paid? The marshals, the judges, the men who buy girls like me? They're still out there. The newspaper said some were arrested. Not all." She held up the tattered newspaper. I want more than to be safe, Silas. I want to be free, and I want justice. For my father, for the women who didn't escape. For her." She touched her belly. He understood. Hiding was not enough. They had to build a life, and a life could not be built on a foundation of fear. It had to be built on truth. "The Capitol," he said, his voice a low rumble. "You want to go to the Capitol? Talk to the governor." "I want to stand in a room," she said, her eyes flashing. "And I want to tell them what I saw. I want to use my own name. I want them to see that I am not ashamed. I want my daughter, our children, to be born into a world where I fought." A slow, proud smile spread across Silas's face. He nodded. "Then we go. We'll ride out at first light. We'll go to the Capitol." On the last morning, the air was clear and warm. The horses were packed. Nora, sleepy and excited, was holding her wooden animals. Silas told Clara to wait. He walked to the large, smooth-barked aspen tree at the edge of the clearing, the one that caught the first light of the sun. He took his knife from his belt. Clara watched him from the porch. He began to carve. His movements were slow, reverent. He was a man performing a ritual. First, he carved a name, Sarah. Then, just below it, Lizzie. He paused, his hand resting on the bark, his head bowed. He was saying goodbye. He was honoring the ghosts that had kept him frozen for 5 years. Clara's heart ached for him, for the love he had lost, and for the strength it had taken him to find it again. He stepped back, looked at the names, and then, his shoulders straight, he stepped forward again. Just below the names of his lost family, he carved again, the letters deep and sure. Clara Nora. He was not replacing his past. He was adding to his life. He was grafting a new branch onto the tree of his heart. He sheathed his knife and walked back to her. He did not say a word. He just took her hand. They mounted, Silas on his strong gray gelding, his rifle in the scabbard, his face turned toward the future. Clara sat on the pack horse, Nora in front of her, the child's head already nodding, asleep in the warmth of the morning. They rode out of the valley, leaving the cabin, the graves, and the ghosts behind. They did not look back. They rode up the same pass Clara had stumbled down a lifetime ago. But this time, it was not an escape. It was a journey. They reached the summit as the sun breached the horizon, spilling liquid gold over the world. Before them, the land opened up, a vast, rolling prairie, endless and open. Stretching farther than the eye could see, the past was behind them. The sun was rising ahead. Thank you for listening to this story from the Wild West. We love to hear where our stories are heard. Please, let us know in the comments where you're listening from. If you enjoyed this tale, be sure to subscribe to From Wild West so you don't miss the next chapter. What did you think of Clara's journey? Share your thoughts with us in English.